Thanks for tuning into the Roaming Homesteaders today. We wanted to show you how we've grown winter wheat in our backyard for the last 2 winters, and just to show you that it's possible to grow things that you would normally only see in farm fields, things like wheat, corn, sorghum, soybeans, field beans, peas, even alfalfa if you wanted. But I'm going to be talking about what we've done for the last 2 winters here in 9B and just give you an idea of what's possible right in your own backyard. In today's video, we're going to go through some pictures, and I'm going to talk a little bit about how we decided to grow wheat in our backyard. In addition to some of the corn and the other things that we grow during the summer, one of the crops that you can actually grow in this climate in 9B is winter wheat. I want to talk about 2 of the books that got me started in growing grains in the backyard. The first one is a book by Sarah Pitzer called Homegrown Whole Grains: Grow, Harvest, and Cook Wheat, Barley, Oats, Rice, Corn, and More. This is a great little book to get started. You can find it on Amazon. I'm going to try to link it down below in the description. But just something to get you started and show you that you can grow practically anything in our backyard. As a matter of fact, I have some millet that's growing as a weed right now from our bird feeder, some of the seed that got cast off. And you never really think about this until you look through and see what people have done. So this is a great book to start with. Homegrown Whole Grains. I highly recommend it as a starter just to get your imagination working. And then when you start talking about, the intricacies of doing this in a way that's similar to how farmers work, this is a great one called Small Scale Grain Raising. I haven't finished reading this yet. This is a book by Logsdon, but it's a good another book that you can find on Amazon, and it's a good treatise to help you think about some of the nutrition needs and all the sort of things that go into growing a good grain crop that you can replicate even in your backyard or on some larger land in a homestead. It makes you think about how this is grown and harvested. And that goes for wheat, winter wheat, as we've done for the last couple of years, corn in the summer, or any other types of grains. Sorghum, I have seeds for sorghum that we're going to start soon. Maybe not this year, but it's in the rotation. And just get you thinking about that. So, if you're considering this, it might be a good thing to spend a few bucks on these books and start gathering information so that you can have the knowledge that you need to really hit the ground running. And we'll go ahead and put up the pictures and we'll show you what we did. The first year that we put wheat in the backyard, we just decided we were going to cut up some of the grass sod and remove it and then till the ground underneath. And you can see here, as we did that, we just took a shovel and literally cut underneath of it and removed the sod until we had a clear area. This is a garden expansion plot. The wheat is actually planted on the left side, and we decided to expand this so that we could still have some garden that year while we waited for the wheat to mature. And you can see how we tilled that in and put just some regular soil and compost in, and then we lined it up for rows so that we could do some row planting on that side. I think that year we had a lot of leafy greens and chards and beets and even some tobacco. That was an experiment. You'll see in some later photos. But as the summer went on, you can see how the wheat started to grow up. This was a variety called Turkey Red, and it grew up very quickly. And looked nice and green. This is probably in April while we're waiting to get the garden side planted. And it looked good for a while. And it started to pop out with the seed heads. And we were generally pretty pleased. But that year was a little wet in the winter and it got out of control quickly. So what you can see here is the wheat got so tall that it lodged. And lodging is where it can get blown over because it's so heavy and wet. And that was difficult, but eventually it stood back up and it started to grow taller, and you can see it's starting to dry down here in probably about first week of May. And then it just started getting drier and drier, just as it's supposed to do. You can see our tobacco plants started growing here in the front of the wheat and the rest of the garden. And we also had some pots, just big planters that we potted different varieties in so we could test out making some extra seed for a larger planting later. That grew very well and dried out a lot quicker than the wheat that was in the ground because the soil dried out more quickly in the containers and the pots out of the ground. And this is back to the earlier part where we were getting the garden portion ready, but you can see how tall the wheat has grown in the meantime on the left there. We were able to get small amounts out of the pots while we waited for the ground planted wheat to mature, and this was one of those. Here's another one of our pots where we had a different variety. I think this was actually rye, so we were experimenting with rye and wheat, and we kept them separate in the garden so that we could not have any cross-pollination and just see how the different varieties did and get those ready for a larger planting later. And there's our tobacco plants that have gone in early in the garden. I think we had tobacco in that row, and then some okra was closer to the front. And we just kind of kept an eye on everything. So we got a little bit of a garden fix while we were waiting for the main wheat plot to finish up so we could plant some more things. And you know, they did very well in our climate. Now, we have a lot of water in the winter, and then it dries out very quickly, and it's a good time about harvest in May and early June, and it just starts drying down really well because of the nice hot sunny weather, and we were very excited for it. But this is the variety called Turkey Red, and we decided to harvest it traditionally, just scything it all down, stooking it, and then drying it out in piles like this here. And that was great, but you have to be very careful with it because you can lose a lot of seed that way. When you stook it and you move it around, you start losing seeds. So we didn't get as much as we could have. Here's an example of how we winnowed it. We winnowed it all by hand that year. And you know, that's a lot of chaff in our little colanders. But when you stook it and pile it, it looks great. You know, it looks very historic and you know, nostalgic, but you lose a lot of seed. And we had a lot of seed fall through while we were harvesting this out, and it actually started growing as weeds over in our gravel area where we winnowed it and tried to get it all ready. And we cut it down. You can see here, you don't see rows here. This was just from broadcast planting. This was not efficient, and it was very difficult to get in and harvest. Additionally, this variety called Turkey Red has very long awls on the seed head. It's very difficult to shatter and separate the grain from the seed head. But it looks really cool in the field, and it was a fun experience to sort of play 19th century hand farmer, you know, doing this all by hand with scythes and knives, and it made for some good pictures in our backyard. We really looked like old style wheat farmers, peasant wheat farmers, to have these piles at different places in the yard. And I'll bet you the neighbors looked over and said, you know, what the heck are they doing back there? It was certainly quite a throwback. But once we got it all cleared, we got the debris out of the yard, cleared out, and then once we tore everything out, we decided to just rototill it in. You can see that's nice and cleaned up here. And we rototilled all of that down and cleaned up all the debris until we had a nice planting to go right into. And then of course we expanded our irrigation system and put in the corn for the year. So that's what we did the first year. We decided that we were going to go ahead and do a test plot in the footprint of our summer garden, and we didn't want to commit the whole garden to it, so we did about 2/3 of the garden. That was about 30 by 20, and I left some space for some squash. Instead of using broadcast seeding as we had done in the past, here in California we ended up using rows, and they were about 11 to 12 inches apart. We went ahead and we rototilled, and then we dug straight rows, and we planted monoammonium phosphate fertilizer with seed just in straight rows, and then we went ahead and tamped it down. You can see that row structure grew up pretty quickly here and gave us that nice spacing that we could get in there. As it got greener and greener, you know, it just looked grassy for a long time, like the yard was getting out of control, but it ended up starting to look pretty healthy, and you had this sort of waving tall grass, you know, 18 inches or 2 feet tall. And it really took off in the spring when the rains and things got a little bit warmer. And it started just turning into this bushy, grassy area. We had all sorts of critters in there, and we were just really curious about what was going to happen. And then we started to see seed heads forming. And if you look at the books and it describes the different stages of growth of winter wheat, it was fascinating to just follow this along and see how it turned from a grass into an actually flowering and then seeding grass. And it started to get taller and taller. And then we started to see it drying toward the bottom. And as we followed that along, we didn't know what we were going to get, but we just watched it growing day by day. And as it started drying toward the bottom, we started getting anxious, because this is about the time that we would have been planting the spring garden, around about March or April. We started getting those last bit of showers. You can see the rainbows there. And, we didn't know what was going to happen. And we started getting anxious. And on this picture, you can see that we had started to plant on the left side of the garden. We were getting some pumpkins and some other things ready to go. And we were just watching that wheat, saying, hey, when's this going to be ready? So we were almost anxious to get it out of there so we could get the summer garden, not realizing that in order to really mature the wheat, it would have to be middle of June or July before we would end up being able to harvest that. But we saw it starting to dry out a little bit more, and those seed heads really started to come in, and it started looking like what you would expect to see in a wheat field. But again, we had never done this before, so we were still just dealing with this sort of green, grassy looking thing. And the heads were kind of mushy, but it was looking really nice. So we'd come out in the yard and we'd see this waving grass. And then it started to dry down. You can see we've got our tomatoes and our squashes planted on the left, and we were wondering, all right, when are we going to harvest this? It's starting to get dried out. What's the proper time? And we were just testing the seed heads to see when they were starting to get hard. And so we sort of ignored it for a little bit. We started focusing on our squashes. This was actually the start of our Georgia candy roaster patch that summer, one of them with some peppers. And then it started to look like actual wheat. And this is where I really started getting anxious, because I was trying to think about getting this wheat out and planting something else in it, but also I wanted to see how much am I going to get out of this. And it just started getting drier and drier. The seed heads just looked absolutely gorgeous. It looked just like wheat fields I remember from Virginia as a kid when I was visiting my grandparents. And it just started turning white and golden. And there were a couple of patches that were clearly not quite ripe, but for the most part it was getting dry and crackly. And one of the secrets to harvesting wheat that I found, that I discovered in Pennsylvania when I first grew this years ago, was there's a very narrow window to harvest wheat. And if you don't catch it at the exact right time, the seed heads will shatter, drop all of the seed on the ground, and there will literally be nothing left to harvest. So you keep an eye on it when it gets close to this stage, and when you see those seed heads actually turning white, you can see the ones on the right there, they're turning white. That's when you know you got to get it. You got to get it pretty quick and hope that there's no rain while you're harvesting. And like the Bible says, when the fields are white unto harvest, that's the time where you need to be harvesting. And we started getting out there just bit by bit, and we were originally gonna scythe it or try to figure out some way to get it all at once. And we did do it one year like that, but we lost so much seed in handling it, we decided to start doing it by hand. And I had this little pruning hook that I used from Irwin, and I tried that for a bit, cutting at the bottom, but then ultimately we just decided to get out there with scissors. And until we have a larger scale production where we can get some bigger equipment or larger scythes and knives and blades, we just started snipping the heads and then cutting down the stalks when we were done. And that was pretty efficient. And the kids would get out there and help me, especially when there was some threats of rain and it started looking ominous. We wanted to get out there so that our crop wouldn't be ruined, but we were able to get the heads off pretty easily. We ended up putting them in a 50-gallon sort of trash can from Lowe's, brand new trash can, and we just snipped and snipped and snipped and threw them in the bucket. And we decided we'd do a couple of rows a day, get them as quickly as we could into the bucket so they could dry off some more, and then we'd be able to thresh those and winnow them later, which is what we ended up doing. But we ended up getting the field cleared bit by bit, day by day. Kids came out to help, Wendy came out to help, and we were able to get, all told, we filled up that entire bucket. But once we crushed down the heads and we got the seeds out, we ended up with about 35 pounds. So in reflection, it's important to have sort of a dedicated area that you know you won't be using for the next season, or you won't mind planting something late June when this is all harvested. And you know, it's a lot of work. You need some help, especially if you got the kiddos and they're excited to come out there and help you and they don't mind the work. We recommend red fife wheat because it's easily separated and you don't get as many spikes from the wheat in your hands. So there's our bucket full of seed heads before we crushed it down and winnowed it. And you know, like I said, it was an interesting experience. I recommend this for anyone who's interested in a little more food security to have this experience. And if you can get the equipment and some other things that we'll detail in a different video, you can really expand this into a large scale production and have a lot more wheat available for your family's consumption. Thanks for watching this short video today. I hope it inspired you to see what's possible. We are really excited to get a little bit more land to expand our operations. It's a lot of work, you know, I won't lie, you know, getting out here with the kids and you know, snipping off heads of wheat because we're trying to figure out a more efficient way to side this or expand our harvesting, and then exploring how things are threshed and winnowed and then prepared to a way that you can actually grind up and use. It's a lot of work, but we found it very, very rewarding. And we just want to tell everybody, you know, this is something that you could and we think you should get into wherever you are. Even if you just have a bucket to throw some seed in and grow into a little patch just to get some extra seed in your hands in case you actually need to expand it, is just really essential and amazing. We're hoping to show you some more of this production as we expand and have some more land of our own. But for now, I hope this inspired you and showed you what's possible even in a backyard. So if you like this video, please click subscribe and hit the bell so you can be notified when we have new videos. And we hope you have a great day.